Thank you so much for having us. I'm Robin Ziegler, founder and CEO of Mural Real Estate Partners. Sally, I feel like we created our company to fit your needs, so we should talk about that. But started Mural about in 22. We focus on mixed-use developments and revitalizations, primarily in emerging markets and underinvested markets, really focusing on the missing middle and creating neighborhoods. For those of you who are from California, I was formerly the Chief Operating Officer of Federal Realty Investment Trust. One of the projects I did was Santana Row. And so we're looking to create neighborhoods and communities like that in underinvested markets using ground floor retail to create the community and affordably priced housing above. So that's kind of our overall strategy. We do projects all across the country. And I'm very happy to be here today to interview and have a fireside chat with Mike Gatto, and I'll allow him to introduce himself.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Gatto, and I'm an appointed member on LACERA, which is Los Angeles County's pension plan. We have just under $80 billion in assets under management. And when the Board of Supervisors here in Los Angeles contacted me, and they said they wanted to mix up the pension. They said they wanted to make pensions popular again. They said they wanted pensions to be, beloved by the public. Now, folks, this is not my day job. I'm also a politician and a lawyer. And if you can't get more popular than that, you tell me how to do it. Maybe you throw in used car salesman and I would have the trifecta. But it's a tremendous honor to serve on this pension board. We take very seriously the mission we have to safeguard the assets and to generate a good rate of return for our members. And it's wonderful to be here with all of you today.
Thanks for that, Mike. So let's start with that, because I think that in and of itself is a little unique. Can you talk to us about kind of your transition, or your combination, I guess would be a better word, from public service to member of the Board of Investments of LACERA, and what does that mean? What do you do as the person on that board?
Sure. So just a little bit about my background, if you haven't read it. I served for 4 terms in the California State Legislature. My district was Hollywood, Los Feliz, Silver Lake, Glendale, Burbank, La Cañada, La Crescenta, and the Angeles National Forest up to the Palmdale border. Just curious, does anybody live in that district?
Got to see if his constituents and voters are in the room.
Yeah, got a couple. Who'd you vote for over there? But I was actually considering a run statewide. I had a very big war chest, and I think it was the second biggest in the state after a guy named Gavin Newsom. And then our 3rd child was born. It was, something that we had been trying for a long time. And my wife said, I think her exact words were, if you are at a fish fry in Modesto when our child is born, then I'm going to kill you. And she asked me to press pause on the elected public office for the time being. And so, we returned back home from Sacramento. And when the Board of Supervisors contacted me to serve on this position, I said yes. It's a wonderful way for me to feel like I'm doing something and that I'm still in public service without flying back to Sacramento several times a week. So my wife is appreciative of it. The Board of Investments, LACERA is unique. We have 2 boards, right? Most pensions have 1, and they do everything from overseeing, retiree benefits and issues like that. But LACERA has 2. We have one that does everything for the members and focuses on benefits stuff. And then I'm on the Board of Investments. What we do is we just focus on investing the members' money. There are some elected members and some appointed members. And I think we'll touch on that a little later, but we have vastly different considerations and vastly different constituencies.
Thank you for that. So kind of starting big picture related to LACERA, and I think in the last panel they kind of touched on this as well. There's been a lot of change in the United States in the last couple of years. And so how does LACERA think about the path forward, shaping the future, and what types of investments are you looking for specifically?
Great question. So if I had to sum up how people feel in the pension space, and obviously I can't speak for all of them, but I do hear this again and again when I talk with my colleagues at other county pensions and certainly at the state level, And that is, there's a lot of anxiety right now. I can't really put my finger on why. I think for a lot of members of these boards, there's a sense that things have been too easy for too long. Things have been too good for too long. And there's this feeling like it's got to turn, right? But you think about how many people in history have been wrong trying to time markets, right? And have made horrible mistakes because of that. So obviously, we're not making any decisions based on people's gut instincts, but that is still something that you should know when you're interacting with pensions, is that people are very mindful of this concept that they should be looking for uncorrelated assets and things that will preserve capital in case there's another downturn. Folks, when's the only time that people care about pensions? Right? When's the only time that pensions are in the news? It's when we screw up, right? It's when there is something like the Great Financial Crisis, and John and Betty taxpayer are told or reminded that they have to backstop pensions in case of an absolute disaster. And so those of us who have been around for quite some time, that's always in the back of our head. We don't want to return. When I was first running for office during the Great Financial Crisis, CalPERS was in the news like every day, and it wasn't for good stuff. And it was something that, like, on the campaign trail, people weren't talking with me about homelessness or education. They were like, hey, what's your plan to change a discount rate at CalPERS? And I was like, whoa. It's weird that people even know about that, right? So there's a lot of anxiety right now. There's a lot of tension, I think, on pension boards just because of this perception that there's lots of risks out there and that things seem to be getting a little more scary.
So for the investors in the room, the GP sponsors, how does one get involved with LACERA? How does one become a sponsor with LACERA? What is that process?
Yeah, great question. So there are what I like to say 4 constituencies to get an in with LACERA. And those 4 constituencies are, of course, the staff, the full-time staff, the consultants that we hire to help us manage things that report directly to the board. And then there's the board itself, which is split into 2. There are elected members and appointed members. The elected members are folks who work for the county. They're people who, some of them are district attorneys, some of them are public defenders, some of them are accountants, some of them are people who fix potholes. They are workers who work for the county. They're elected by the membership. And then there's the appointed members like me, where the California Government Code requires us to have significant experience in institutional investing, whatever that is. But so you can get into LACERA going through any one of those 4. There's no wrong way to get into LACERA. There are certain requirements, threshold requirements. Now we have a clearinghouse where you're supposed to send your materials to. It's newopportunities@lacera.com. But of course, it always helps to have a personal connection with one of the 4 constituencies that can help push your investment or who really believe in it and think that it's something we should do.
I was going to ask, of those 4, which is most effective? Folks feel like if they go into a website and kind of put their information and is going into the intersphere, and no one will actually see it. So of those 4, if you were telling, this group of friends and family in this room, what's the most effective way to get through?
That's a great question. So, I don't think, look, I'm tempted to say don't talk to me because I get enough pitches and such, but the reality is there is no wrong way. It's wonderful if you can convince the topical investment staff who oversees your specific sector that you've got the greatest thing since sliced bread and a better mousetrap. It's often very hard to get in with the staff, though, because they sit in Pasadena in their office building and they don't come to conferences like this, right? So people tend to, most often they talk with trustees, they talk with the consultants. But again, you just have to be excellent. You just have to, as long as you meet the minimums, which I'll try to talk about a little bit. Just the threshold thing, right? Know our limits. We have minimum investment limits, maximum concentrations with a single manager. We have fund concentration limits, geographic limits, leverage limits. all of these things are public. You can do some quick research on our website. You can find out what those are. Please don't ask me what they are because they change and I'm not sure what they are from month to month. But it's very important that, as long as you meet the basic thresholds, you've met those limits and you've got somebody who's going to be your help push, then I think you have a fighting chance of doing business with a fund like LACERA.
So as a member of the Board of Investments, I'm assuming sponsors or deals are coming to the board and you're assessing whether this is a adequate investment. What are the types of kind of investment packages that you see that kind of get you and the rest of the board really excited? And what are some examples, don't use any names, but some examples of groups or packages you've seen and you're like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, we're not even going to look at this.
Fascinating. Great question. So let's see. So, I was at a conference about 3 months ago, and they had a panel, or they had a room just like this, except there's about 300 people in it, and they pitched it as a Shark Tank. There's a whole bunch of pension attendees in the audience, and there was a whole bunch of people who wanted to do business with pensions who got a chance to just present Shark Tank style. And there was one guy who got up there and he just gave this fantastic presentation in front of this random, conference panel, and he won the Shark Tank round. The people on the stage agreed that he was the best thing, and like all of a sudden he became a hot commodity. Like lots of people within LACERA, lots of people within other county pensions were like, "Wow, this is a great. This guy's got a great record, and he's got a great thesis, and everything like that." And it's like, yeah, the rest is history. There are some more interesting ways to approach people and some investments that have not been so successful. I was at another conference recently, and people like you're walking around wearing the lanyard, and people are kind of squinting, and then I saw this young lady do a double take, and then turn around and make a beeline, and she's like, "Oh, your last name. Is that Italian? I love Italian food. By the way, I've got a, blah, 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 and I've got this." And I was like, I really look, as someone who used to be in politics, I really appreciated her gumption, and I'm certainly guilty of doing stuff like that when I saw a major donor back in the day. But then, the thing she pitched was so risky, just in that, I myself could immediately pick 4 or 5 things that I think would be, serious risk of catastrophic loss. It was very intriguing, and it was something that we are not typically pitched on. It was real estate related, but it just had so many, I think, political and regulatory risks in the future that it was just something that we didn't want to touch. But I mean, look, the best guidelines, and I hate to bore you by just saying some of this stuff, but you got to be able to say how you're different, why your returns have been different, while they'll continue to be different to the best of your ability, why you are not correlated with some of the other folks. Those are the things we're looking for, just like anybody else.
Yeah, that's helpful, because I know as Mural, as I said, we do mixed use development and we do value add and core plus. And coming from, formerly as a chief operating officer of 2 retail REITs, and doing mixed-use development in both, part of the way we mitigated risk and kind of dealt with the NOI, quarter-over-quarter NOI growth and dividend distributions that we needed to make was by diversifying our portfolio and having core plus, value add, and opportunistic within the same portfolio. And so that's how I think about the best way to mitigate our risk and still be able to create outsized value and returns. But it seems as though in the private equity institutional capital space, it's very siloed, right? They want core or multifamily core in the Sun Belt, or retail value add in Texas with a grocer. It's very, very specific. And so when LACERA thinks about risk mitigation and kind of this, and I don't know if there are silos within LACERA, how do you and I was talking to some folks during the networking break this morning who have some of the same challenges relative to a mix of uses. How does LACERA think about that?
Great question. So the best thing to keep in mind is that everything that every pension does is public. I have talked with so many analysts, and before they take a position, the amount of research that they do is astounding. And yet, I've also talked with so many people seeking to do business with LACERA that seem like they have not even done the basic research of pulling our minutes from our last meeting before they come into us. You can gain tremendous insight into what exactly we're looking for by just pulling our public documents. For example, some of the examples that Robin, you gave, which are, you could read that, we have a targeted allocation of blah, 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 this many $1 billion in this region, and, we just exited something domestic, and we're looking for, a commercial investment in the Sun Belt. These things are all public. They're all public. You can see exactly what our targets are, how we want to balance, and then what we exited and what we want to enter into. And so those opportunities are out there if you just have somebody do the research, and then you strike at the right time because it's all there, and it's all available to you.
No, that's very helpful, and I think that then tells us on a kind of day-by-day basis what LACERA's investment landscape looks like, or what you're looking to invest in. Would you say overall, I've heard from a lot of folks that people feel like this now is the best time to buy when you look at kind of the GFC cycles and the pandemic, and now whatever this is, it'll have an acronym by Tuesday. How do you think about this environment, or how does LACERA think about this environment that we're in right now? Are you bullish? Are you bearish? Is this the right time to invest?
Great question. And starting with the basics, LACERA has about $5 billion, or in excess of $5 billion invested just in real estate. And we do see opportunities everywhere. There's a lot of things that we're looking at and that we continue to look at. But I do think there is a great debate going on right now, and there's a lot of tension. Specifically, you pick on something like office, right? I'm reminded of the old Russian proverb, which is married men live longer. And then the other side says, yeah, but they want to die more often. There's just this awful debate, and there's no delta between the two positions where, I heard a former CIO from CalSTRS saying that this is a once in a generation opportunity for office and for certain types of commercial. And then, you hear other people say vehemently on the other side that no, there's a lot more there's a lot more room for it still to fall. And so, personally, I think that there are some very good opportunities in the office sector, but I think that there's, you go into a room at a pension with 5 people, you'll have 6 different opinions on it. Again, it's just making the case, right? If you have the world's greatest office portfolio and you can make a compelling argument why people culturally in the locations that you own are returning to work, and that there's a real cultural shift back post-pandemic to returning to work, for example, then I think you can make a way more compelling case than just, somebody who owns yet another building in some urban center where the Gen Z folks are still working at home over Zoom. So, that's just one example, but I think that, we're always looking for opportunities, and I do think, personally, I believe that this is a good time to be investing in real estate writ large.
No, thank you for that. One of the topics for today's panel was around ESG. So what would you say is LACERA's overall stance on ESG, and how do you think about kind of sustainable investing relative to your overall strategy?
Great question. So, ESG, there's so much you could say about it. I'll start at the very beginning, right? So the California Constitution, I think it's Article 16, Section 17, of course, imposes a very strict duty on us to minimize the risk of loss and maximize the rate of return. And that is our guiding principle with everything, even ESG. The Constitution also says that the legislature can step in and prohibit certain classes of investments. For example, we did that during apartheid. The legislature did that for certain other things. And there, if you think about it, that's also where there is an ESG connection, because the risk of doing business in a jurisdiction that is so bad, or with an actor that is perceived to be such a bad actor, you're also putting our investments at risk. The personal values of our members and our retirees are very important to us. of course, ESG has a very broad definition, and is something that has permeated so deeply into the consciousness. There's a lot of ESG washing that occurs as well. And so it's almost become, I'm not saying for everybody, but for a lot of different actors, it's become almost meaningless. Does anyone want to take a guess in the room? What is the most common ESG thing that we actually hear about? The thing that people most often grumble to us about, the thing that people most often show up to our meetings and speak about during public comment? Any guesses?
Traffic.
Traffic, interesting. No? Any other guesses? Just shout it out. Nobody? Nobody. All right.
No one knows.
It is. It's more, I think, of the S and G. It's definitely not the E, right? We most often hear about labor disputes. We most often hear that somebody, we invested in such and such, and they own a bunch of real estate, blah, 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 and they're treating their workers poorly, right? And people are like, oh, well, why should a pension care about that? Folks, we're a pension investing labor unions' money into things, right? Of course our members care about that. I mean, we get an earful. They will show up out of solidarity if they perceive that one of our partners has been treating workers poorly. So of all the ESG factors, that's the one that is most, it's most often on our mind, because we'll have a line out the door of people wanting to talk to us at a meeting if there's something that can go wrong. And again, we try to tie in all ESG factors. It is an omnipresent consideration in all we do, but it is mostly in the context, of course, of our constitutional duties to maximize return and minimize risk. If there is a big labor disruption, for example, that's a huge risk. If somebody gets, in trouble in the news because they've got slaves overseas or something like that, that is a huge risk. So we view our morals and the moral compass that guides us and our duty to be ethical in the context of our constitutional duty, which is to maximize return and minimize risk.
No, that's very interesting. And I think for us developers in the room who are always trying to figure out how to make the numbers work, union versus non-union, and those types of things come up all the time. So it's very helpful to get that perspective. Relative to LACERA overall, you had mentioned that, one of the things you get when you're kind of out as a politician is people are asking, like, what about my retirement? So kind of given this capital environment, how do you think about LACERA's overall health and, the allocation of dollars in the future, and what are the types of things overall for LACERA, like how allocated will they be in real estate?
Great question. So LACERA has had a very blessed last several years and last decade. We've done very well, even in comparison to our peers, and I think that's largely a result of the really good investment team that we have. The thing that we're all mindful, of course, is that investment teams can move around, and obviously past performance is no guarantee of future results, right? So we are, like I said, there's almost a palpable concern, I think, in a lot of county pensions, where people are mindful that, happy days have been here, but there could be bad things right around the corner. What does that mean for our allocation? I think it's good for real estate, right? I think it's largely positive for people in this room, because if we see dramatic, losses, if the world sees dramatic losses in some of the more, obvious sectors and obvious allocations, then I think there will be a lot of people turning to real estate and turning to non-traditional real estate and, esoteric real estate vehicles and things like that are not so correlated with the overall financial health of the economy. So I do see, LACERA's focus on real estate increasing in the next several years. I also do see that the topic of what we allocate and where will become very hot and very important. Most of what we do, again, you can see our public meetings minutes. Most of what we do is unanimous votes. We take these votes, most of them are unanimous. The only non-unanimous vote that we've had recently was over our allocations. It was what we should put in what, for where, and for how long. And I think that is reflective of the fact that there's just so many theses out there about what's what and where things are headed, and that there's a lot of concern. But from a real estate perspective, I do think we are going to be looking at so many of the things that people in this room have to offer and other folks out there, because we are eyeing the non-correlated returns in the years ahead.
Thank you. The fact that you're a politician, a lawyer, and on the board of LACERA, I can't help but ask, are there any policies coming out nationally or locally that you think will impact how LACERA views real estate, how you view your investment strategy? Are there any policies that you're focused on that you think will have an outsized impact that us in this room should be concerned about?
So Sally talked about it, in the last panel. It's this whole idea of California having this, or the political people in California, the political classes, believing that we have this horrible housing shortage, right? Personally, I take a very contrarian view on this, right? And it's so different, and probably y'all are gonna, throw arrows at me before I leave. But, we don't really have a housing shortage compared to previous times in our country's existence. We have a size issue in that housing units have grown vastly in size, and we have a household size problem in that in the past, household sizes were much bigger, vastly bigger than they are now. So now, you'll have 1.2 humans living in a 5,000 square foot house, right? And if you look just back 20 years ago, it was more like they had 4 or 5 humans living in a 2,000 square foot unit, right? And when you view it from that perspective, it's more of a demographic issue than it's like a housing shortage. But okay, that's my personal opinion.
As a person with 2 teenage kids, I can't imagine living, all 4 of us, in a 2,000 square foot, but I hear you.
Oh, no, but this is something I encourage you to do, and it's totally crazy, right? People throw out, the 50s. If you go back and look at census records from the 50s, I've done it, and you look back and you'll see some house that you see and you drive by it every day, and you'll see that they had like mom, dad, 5 kids, and 2 boarders or 2 tenants living there. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I'm not saying we go back to that, but I also think that, this world we live in, especially in Southern California, where, again, you've got the single professional, young lawyer, and he's living in a 4,000 square foot house in the suburbs. Like, those days have to change, right? But the legislature and decision makers at the various pensions and everywhere, they're really wrestling with this idea of a housing shortage. And how can government do anything? Again, I take a contrarian view. I don't think the government can subsidize our way out of this housing shortage. I think you look at the per unit construction costs in a lot of jurisdictions, it's prohibitive, it's just way too high. In San Francisco, they were paying like $1.3 million per unit, something crazy like that. I mean, if you just needed to build here's a stat for you. And by the way, this should absolutely affect your investments. If the state of California wanted to build enough units in the city of Los Angeles, I'm not talking West Hollywood where we are, I'm not talking Beverly Hills, I'm not talking Malibu, just in the city of Los Angeles, and ignored the rest of the state, and they just built enough units to house our homeless population in Los Angeles City alone, it would bankrupt the entire state budget. I just want you to think about that. Like, for people who are like, we just need more subsidies, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm talking like the state of California would not spend a thing on salaries or roads or cops or firefighters, nothing for the entire year just to build the housing in the city of Los Angeles to house our homeless population. So I think it's gonna fall on lots of you. It's gonna fall on you to come up with creative ways to build things that are investable that can house the people that need housing. And so there's tremendous opportunities there. And those are the policy changes that I think are going to affect a lot of people in the room coming down from the state. Follow what the legislature does. And then, of course, the legislature also will mess with what pensions do from time to time. They'll say you need to divest from Turkey or you need to divest from these countries or that. But those are minor, I think, in the grand scheme of things.
No, that's very, you've given all of us something to do relative to figuring out how to thread that needle. And there is, this constant tension between construction costs, just fundamentally how much it costs to build a unit, and how to create housing that's affordable for the people that live there. What are the kind of innovative projects or initiatives that LACERA is working on now that you feel like is going to make a difference in how we think about real estate or how we think about investments? Are there any projects that LACERA is working on currently that you think is kind of pushing us outside of the normal envelope?
Fascinating question. So I'm trying to think of what I've seen come across the desk recently that is very innovative. I mean, the thing about, y'all know the market conditions right now. I mean, real estate has been largely picked clean, and there's I think there's a lot more. There's a lot of capital. For the last 10 years, there has been a lot of capital chasing a lot of deals, and that has changed a little bit recently. But largely, that's the world we find ourselves in. There's been some intriguing stuff that we've seen having to do with how society manages seniors, in terms of providing housing for seniors that is not directly subsidized, but is not a reverse mortgage. So there's interesting stuff for that. But we've seen a lot of people making the arguments for smaller markets, versus trying to do everything in California, or in Los Angeles, San Jose, and San Francisco, Oakland. But other than that, look, it's very hard, I think, to have the investment staff at LACERA say, "Wow, I've never heard of that before." But if you've got something, we're absolutely all ears. We'd love to hear from you.
So I don't know where we are on time. I don't know who's timekeeping. I have not been, but
We got a thumbs up over there. 15
okay,
minutes.
great. So we'll open the room and see if there's any questions in the room, and we'll go from there. Does anyone have any questions for Mike?
Well, I just kind of felt like noticing that the projects that I have seen that you did, Robin, in your lifetime around mixed use and the creation of affordable housing happened because density was allowed.
Yes.
Right? And isn't density really what most developers can count on to make or break a project, right? And frankly, the NIMBY move in the state of California is maybe as bad as any place in the country. Mike, go at that for a second.
Great question. So, and it raises two themes. So one, I'll talk about thematically what you just asked about, and then I'll segue into something else, which I wanted to remind this room anyway. So this is the first time in my life where we've seen a counter NIMBY movement, right? We've got the YIMBY movement, and we've got people who are actively pushing for density. Density is what makes a project profitable. We get it.
It's also super green.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. It is super green.
If done right, density is actually what allows community, which is what happens in a lot of the mixed-use developments that we've done. It's not just about bricks and sticks and building it as high as you can, but it's how do you really activate that ground floor plane? How do you create community and neighborhood? And to do all of that, to have viable green space, to offset that from a return standpoint, you need density. And so it's like how you think about all of it collectively.
Yeah, so I think there's a decisive shift towards the concepts that both of you are talking about happening with all the decision makers and all the stakeholders, at least in California. And I think that horse is out of the barn, and I don't think it's going to go back. I think it's going to be very hard for NIMBYs to control things again like they did in the 70s and 80s. That being said, there is also a counter push, right? There is, for example, when Mr. Newsom, he's a friend of mine, I know him well, but when he said every city has got to bear the burden of this, blah, 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 you started to have some mayors saying, well, wait a minute, like our city was basically incorporated because people wanted to move out here and have horse properties. I'm making this up. And so, every property here is 5 acres, and people bought there because they don't want a building right next to theirs. They're people who value their isolation, and that's just fine. And in many cases, that city is located in a region that is right next to another city that is saying, give me your density. We want to build the high rises. And so this idea that like every city has got to, do this, I think it should be more regional. I think we should have a system that says, if city X wants to, they should make tradable credits basically, where the cities who don't participate can buy credits from the cities that do. That would probably just even enhance the push for density in those cities that want it, and I think that would be fantastic. And we'd get there a lot faster than a whole bunch of lawsuits that have plagued the state. But that brings up another issue that I just want to remind you of, and it just comes from me putting back on my legislator's hat, and that is, if you think there is something that would greatly benefit your investments, and if you think there is something that would greatly benefit society, go talk to the legislature and get it done. And I know that sounds like so simple, but I just want to remind people, in California, we are not Congress. In Congress, they will vote on 5 bills a year, and maybe 2 will become law, and it's a long, long, long process. In California, in the last legislative session, there were 5,000 bills introduced. 5,000. Now, folks, if you stuck a gun to your head and said, give me 5 good ideas, right, you'd be stuttering and stammering at about 2, right? So these were all a bunch of like crazy stuff, and we are a bill mill, and we legislate too much. But the legislative year in California looks something like this. In January, I'm in the shower, I have an idea. I introduce it in February. It goes through the committee process in the spring. It gets passed by the legislature in the summer, and it's the law of the land by September. And I know it sounds like, oh, he's making that sound too easy, but a lot of the people that have come forward and proposed these wonderful density things that have allowed these wonderful projects to occur, they just contact a legislator and say, hey, we need to solve the housing crisis. I've got an idea. And if the lawmaker, you got at least a 50-50 chance, that lawmaker says, yeah, it makes good sense. I'll introduce the bill. I mean, you can actually affect things that affect your industry and do a lot of good for society by just speaking up. There's a lot of brain power in this room, and you guys know the real estate industry really well. Go talk to lawmakers. Some of them are jerks, some of them have egos, but there's a lot of them that really mean well, and they will do something good if you've got a good idea.
Yes, I mean, it's a really good point when I think about, not just Santana, but Assembly Row in Boston, Bethesda Row in Maryland, Pike and Rose in Rockville, Maryland. All of these large mixed-use developments we built, even under the REIT structure, were all done through public-private partnerships. It was me sitting, sometimes the project in D.C. in Ward 7 that has been historically undercapitalized, it was me sitting down with the mayor and saying, okay, this is what we have, this is what we want to do. Let's talk about what you have and what you want to do, and creating kind of bespoke public-private structures to make these projects work. And when I look over my career of all of these that we've built, every single one of them is different. They're all public-private partnerships, but the structure and the subsidies, if you will, or how we effectuated getting the additional density or getting the benefits that we needed, every single one of them is different. I can't point to 2 that are the same because it is having direct conversations with the council person and the mayor, and in some ways the governor, and the transportation department, whatever it took to make the overall project work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other questions in the room? Yes.
Excuse me. So I've heard the word uncorrelated a number of times today. I'm just kind of curious, could you give me some color around what that feels like in today's environment of what uncorrelated might be?
Sure, and I noticed that I was using that word a lot too, and I sort of had some regret after that because I was hoping there wouldn't be a question on that. But I remember, during the GFC, Merrill Lynch put out this very famous study that showed that in the lead up to the GFC, all asset classes, including gold, right, were like 97% correlated. And, during the GFC, we saw that literally everything, pulled back at the same time, right? Keeping in mind the generalization that generals are always fighting the last war, I think what I'm trying to say is that I think when I talk to a lot of pensions and the different folks involved, whether it's board members or staff or consultants, they're mindful of what happened during the GFC, and they're looking to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Now, because generals often fight the last war, and it's often not the right thing to do, who knows if that's the right pursuit. But what they are looking for are things that are preservation, that either preserve capital or preserve value when everything else is in the tank, or they're looking for something that has steady and boring returns that, of course, beat the risk-free return rate, but are not so subject to the whim of the market, right? I believe that the Wall Street in general is probably too concerned with this. Again, my personal belief, but I think it's too concerned with wars in Asia, but I think it's underpricing the risk of political crises here at home. But look, I mean, I could be right or I could be wrong. It's a binary switch. But if the markets tank for some other reason, and I think all of us could list 5 triggers or catalysts for that, we just want to make sure that we've got things that are uncorrelated with you, right? I mean, and again, I can define that another way if you want it. But it's capital preservation, and it's making sure that the returns are not dependent on the health of NVIDIA's stock price, right? That's how I best sum it up.
The state of California leaked over local community legislation building with SB 9. Is there any other type of legislature coming out of California that, I guess, catalyzes development and investment in communities like it has, or does, or is doing?
Well, I should probably start with a question to you, which is SB 9 working? Because I've heard both things. Really?
Amazing.
Okay. That's good to know. So people are using it to
Build ADUs and
Got it, okay.
move their mother-in-laws into them.
Gotcha.
So
All right.
On and on. I see it everywhere.
Because I saw something recently, some article that was pretty critical of it. But I mean, look, it's very simple. If you want to see the housing bills, I'll give you like a hack. I mean, you can go. There's a website called leginfo.legislature.ca.gov. You go there in February and you just pull up Scott Wiener. He is the author of most of the controversial housing bills. He represents a San Francisco district. He's very pro-development. He's very pro-density. He's very pro-YIMBY. He and Toni Atkins, she's a senator from San Diego, they introduced like 90% of the things like SB 9, and Toni obviously was the author of SB 9. You just look at their bill package every year. They get an allocation of, I think it's 25 bills in the Senate. They have to be finalized by February. You just look at them and you're like, oh, this is what's coming. And again, I'm shocked at how few people do this. It's public information. It's the closest thing to MNPI, except it's all public by definition. It's like, this guy introduced this bill that's going to do X. It's going to totally, disrupt the market in some weird way. And it's got to be disclosed in February, and people could act on it all year long, and it's going to be the law of the land next year. And like, people are just like, they don't look at it. They wait until, So yeah, just watch what Scott Wiener introduces, watch what Toni Atkins introduces, and there's always more things like SB 9.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Just looking back on what you were talking about the political, a couple of questions. One was how political is the selection process? Is there still like an ongoing network, or is it kind of fairly open? And do you prioritize LA County deals, or are you truly agnostic?
Sure. So are you asking like how political was the selection process to be on the Board of Investments?
No, just what you invest into.
Oh, no, it's not political. It's with very few exceptions, the politics have been taken out of it, right? I mean, it's because we have such a diffuse decision-making process with the 4 constituencies I talked about, or really 3 constituencies I talked about. The politics will rear its head certain times. Like I said, if it's very splashy, like, if it's a very splashy labor dispute, or a company has a really horrible track record of, human trafficking in Southeast Asia or something like that, then of course politics will creep in. But other than that, it is very much based on, our mandate of maximizing return and minimizing risk. And then your second question was,
Do you prioritize any county deals, or
no, we are completely agnostic. I want to say our current public mix is, we're invested all around the world. We have, I want to say our real estate, I mean, I looked this up for this speech and then I promptly forgot it, and it's not in my notes. But I mean, I want to say that our mix is still, majority domestic, but we've got a ton of investments in Europe, Asia, and Africa. So, we are, a fund as big as, I think LACERA would be, LACERA is like the 10th biggest pension in the world or something like that. So we're invested all over the world. Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful. Any other questions in the room?
Not as big as CalSTRS, though. So I see Sally.
I have one question that I forgot to ask earlier that the audience may find helpful. The CalSTRS talked about how long their process takes, like what one could expect relative to time frame. Can you talk to us about LACERA's time frame? If a sponsor comes in with a deal, how long does it take them to work through the LACERA framework?
Great question. So I have seen certain deals that fit or fulfill an immediate need happen in a surprising short window, which I would say is months. Like those deals are rare, but
And we're talking 3 months, 12 months, 9 months?
The fastest that I have seen something happen is like 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
Fastest. Most of the time, you're looking at somewhere around a year to possibly longer. I mean, oftentimes we've seen folks sort of court the trustees and the staff and the consultants, and then something will happen later that year where we will rebalance our portfolio and we'll say, oh, yeah, we really do need something there. And didn't so-and-so give a compelling, yeah, they gave a compelling presentation last year, and then we'll contact them. So, I mean, when you contact a pension, you guys all know this, vast government entities don't move fast, but sometimes you can plant the seeds and it can come and bear fruit much later because we will all of a sudden have a need that is something that you have ready and, waiting to go.
All right. I want to make sure we have no other questions before we wrap up. All right, I think we have expended everyone's energy on on the topic. So thanks for having us, and thank you so much, Mike.